Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
An Australian mining company has agreed to pay Mali $160 million after their CEO was detained along with two colleagues during a visit to the country.
Taking a look at a stock in Australia this morning, this is Resolute Mining. It's listed on the ASX 200, and we're actually seeing shares, well, they're significantly plunging, down the most since 1988, but it's really not a great story here.
The payment, half now, half later, has been agreed as Mali's military leaders are looking to get a greater share of revenue from its mining industry, and foreign operators are in its sights.
They adopted a new mining code that could see the government increase its stake to 35% in existing gold mines, and that's caused all kinds of trouble for some of the biggest miners there, including Barrick.
On this episode of the Next Africa podcast, we'll ask if Africa's third largest gold producer is still a safe place to invest, and whether more executives could find themselves in detention as the government demands to renegotiate mining deals. I'm Jennifer Zabasajja, and this is the Next Africa podcast, bringing you one story each week from the continent, driving the future of global growth with the context only Bloomberg can provide. Joining us this week are Bloomberg's Katarina Höije in Dakar and our mining and metals reporter William Clowes in Johannesburg. Thank you both for being here. This is a fascinating story that I've kind of personally been really interested in. But let's just take a few steps back and start with the arrest of the Resolute executives and what happened there to lead us to here.
Resolute's CEO, Terry Holohan, and two other employees that the company has not named traveled to Mali earlier this month, possibly on an invite from the Malian authorities to discuss what they say are unsubstantiated claims made against Resolute. They were meeting with tax authorities and Mali mining authorities. And following these meetings on November 8, Holohan and his colleagues were arrested at their Bamako hotel. Mali is saying that Resolute, which operates Syama gold mine in Mali, one of the most productive mines, and is set to ramp up production this year and next, owe the Malian state 100 billion CFA francs. That's about 160 million. And they were detained at what's the financial crimes court in Bamako for almost 2 weeks until Wednesday evening. This week, Resolute said it agreed to pay 80 million of those to settle this dispute and for the release of its staff. They've also agreed to talks to transfer its mining concession to a new mining code adopted last year, in a sense to sort of resolve dispute.
Wow. So, William, maybe you can tell us a bit more about this payment that was made that Katarina was just talking about. That's a significant amount of money. And where exactly is Mali claiming these funds are from or are for?
It's a difficult one to answer because the Malian government hasn't actually provided any evidence. We can know a bit about the allegations from talking to the companies and people in and around the government, that the state's allegations relate to back taxes going back to the middle of last decade, to dividends that the state thinks they should have received from these joint ventures, and the foreign companies' use of offshore bank accounts for doing business in Mali. However, whether the claims against the companies have any merit or not, the authorities in Mali have been using these allegations to renegotiate the partnerships with these companies. And so far, at least in the short term, they've been very successful.
Resolute declined to comment for this podcast, but in statements released since Holohan was detained, the company has said while the state's claims against the company are, quote, unsubstantiated, the agreement that will see Resolute pay $160 million also commits the government to drop those same claims. The Malian authorities did not respond to our request for comment. And it's coming at a time where we are seeing gold prices fluctuate, climbing the last that I saw. When we think about gold extraction and gold mining in the Sahel, in Mali, how significant is it for the country, Katarina?
Well, I mean, Mali is one of Africa's biggest gold producers and even one of the biggest in the world. Gold production last year was at 105 tons. Gold is also by far its biggest source of export revenue. It's estimated that more than 2 million people, about 10% of the population, depend on the mining sector. And then we're talking both industrial and artisanal for the livelihood. Gold has become even more important as an income source since Mali saw much of its aid suspended following 2 military coups, one in 2020 and another one in 2021. And back then, the country was also temporarily cut off from regional markets. And at one point, they faced far-reaching economics and financial sanctions by neighbors when they failed to meet a deadline for elections. So, I mean, definitely something that the junta is trying to get more resources from and gain a better control of.
Well, and that's from the perspective of the junta, sorry. But when we talk about the companies that are operating in the region, it's very important to them, right? I mean, William, you mentioned a few of the biggest mining companies. This must be an important region for them to operate and to profit from.
You've got large mining companies operating in the country. The four biggest mines there are operated by Barrick Gold, which is the second biggest gold company on the planet. Other slightly smaller ones, Allied Gold, B2 Gold, and of course, Resolute Mining. Some of these companies have their primary asset in Mali. And in the case of Barrick, it's one of the biggest gold mines on the planet. At a time of high gold prices, there is no way in which they're going to risk losing these assets, which I suppose, if you think about it, is the sort of ultimate threat the Malian authorities are leveling at the companies.
So stick with us. When we come back, we're going to get into what this payout actually means and what effect it could have on other foreign companies that are working in the region, but also across the continent. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Today on the podcast, we're looking into why Mali has been arresting foreign mining executives and whether we could see more payouts like the $160 million from Australia's Resolute. So, Katarina, what are some of the changes that we've seen from the junta in Mali? What are they attempting to do?
One of the key measures is a new mining code that was adopted last year. There's also been the audit that William mentioned, which has led to more regulatory disputes, including claims of back taxes, which is what Resolute and Barrick are facing. Some companies have also been ordered to transfer operations back to Mali, which is the case with IAMGOLD and Ashanti, who transferred their Yatela mine early this month. We've also seen other actors entering Mali's mining sector. The country has moved away from its sort of traditional Western partners, including the EU and the US, and reinforced its ties with Russia, most prominently by the deployment of Wagner Group mercenaries back in 2021. And more recently, Russia has also pledged to build a gold refinery in Bamako. This is unlikely to happen anytime soon, but the president said with Barrick and Resolute sort of gives an idea of how Mali is going forward. And this is a stance that's likely to continue as long as the military is in power there.
Yeah, and that brings me to you, William, as somebody who covers the sector quite often. I mean, it's your beat. What are these companies saying about the changing landscape that these governments are at least trying to instill?
So if we take the four biggest gold mining companies in Mali, or the four biggest gold mines in Mali operated by these multinationals, Resolute has definitely experienced the most eye-catching, eye-raising treatment. I mean, inviting a company CEO to fly all the way to Mali and then arresting them is a pretty drastic negotiating tactic. But the other three big companies, Barrick, Allied, and B2 Gold, they're all headquartered in North America. They've been experiencing comparable pressures. Allied and B2 Gold sort of got ahead of it and recently announced agreements with the Malian state. One of them will migrate their mining project to the new mining code that Katarina mentioned, and the other one won't. But what they will both do is make large payments to the state, $115 million for Allied and $204 million for B2 Gold. And importantly, they've agreed to put their expansion projects that they're building fully on this new mining code that has these higher taxes, higher royalties, etc. And as for the really big one, which is Barrick's very large Loulo-Gounkoto mine, those renegotiations have got pretty acrimonious, not as acrimonious as anyone as arresting the CEO, but nevertheless, the CEO has said he's very confident of reaching an agreement with the authorities, and that agreement, if finalized, when finalized, will surely see Mali increase its share of profits and revenue from that joint venture. So in short, everyone is negotiating, some in more comfortable conditions than others, and all of them are basically giving Mali's leaders more or less what they want.
Is this ultimately these governments and the Malian government with the upper hand, or what is the negotiating power that these companies have, if anything?
Well, it's hard to say at this point, but clearly these gold mining companies, some of which, as I said, have their key assets in Mali, are sort of energetically negotiating with the state and concluding agreements that will transfer large sums of money now to the state and in the future to the state, and basically decrease their shares of future revenue and profits. And I think that shows how committed they are to retaining control of these mines. You know, they've also accepted the new code, which is more onerous for them and more beneficial for the state, for the expansion projects that they already have underway. But where I think we might see Western investors think twice and take a step back, especially after Terry Holohan's experience, are those who have projects in Mali that are at an earlier stage, or those who were considering entering Mali with the gold sector, the mining sector more broadly. This will definitely, to understate it slightly, give them cause for pause.
Thank you both so much for joining us. That's William Clowes and Katarina Höije, our two Bloomberg reporters. And as we said earlier, Resolute declined to comment for this podcast, but in statements released since Holohan was detained, the company has said that while the state's claims against the company are, quote, unsubstantiated, the agreement that will see Resolute pay $160 million also commits the government to drop those same claims. You can read full coverage of this story across Bloomberg platforms now. Here's a few other stories we're watching in the region this week. South Africa's inflation rate fell to a 4-year low ahead of another reduction in interest rates. Consumer prices rose 2.8% in October, down from 3.8% the previous month, and lower than the 3% many economists had actually been expecting. And an opposition leader won elections in Somaliland, casting doubt over whether the semi-autonomous region will honor a deal that will enable Ethiopia to build a military base on its coast on the Gulf of Aden. Abdirahman Mohammed Abdullahi, a former Speaker of Parliament, won about 64% of the ballots cast in the November 13th vote, according to official tallies. His campaign pledges included reviving the region's faltering economy, restoring national unity, and maintaining political stability. And you can follow these stories and more across Bloomberg, including the Next Africa newsletter. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. This program was produced by Adrian Bradley. Don't forget to follow and review this show. We'd love to hear from you wherever you usually get your podcasts. I'm Jennifer Zabasajja. Thanks as always for listening.